Hey everybody, Koldar here. Today we are looking at Blade Lord Tyok in Heart of Fear, and this is 10 man, normal difficulty. So, we found that this fight really revolved around controlling the space that you utilize in this long hall in which you're fighting the boss, and properly positioning the raid therein, so you don't get overwhelmed with the tornado mechanic on this fight. Now you may notice while you're clearing trash up to the boss, you have to fight 4 various commander-type mobs in each of the little cubbies around the room. And lo and behold, these will each have a unique ability that sort of teaches you the abilities that the boss will use when you fight him. So the first of those abilities, and the most important, is Tempest Slash. Blade Lord will use this every 25 to 30 seconds, and he casts it on a random raid member. He prefers ranged targets. So when he does this, it will shoot a tornado out at that player's current location in a straight line and deal damage to anyone caught in that line with the tornado. Once the tornado reaches that player's position, it will stop and start circling in a small concentric circle for the rest of the fight. So you can easily avoid it. You can see one sort of floating to my left there. Just by sidestepping it, but that tornado doesn't go away. And of course, if you get hit by it, it will do damage, it'll knock you away, and this could potentially knock you into other tornadoes or other bad positioning effects, and so it can get dangerous. So that's why you're given such a large hallway in which to fight the boss. You basically want to find a positioning system that allows your raid to avoid extra tornado damage wherever possible. So let's go ahead and loop to the start again, and I'll show you the sort of positioning that we decided to use that seemed to work pretty well for avoiding this mechanic. So as we go back to the start of the fight, once I move my camera, as we pull the boss all the way to the end of the hall, you'll notice that all of our ranged DPS and our other healer there are sort of in a half circle at the top of the stairs at the far end of the hall here. So the reason for these positions is that we wanted a way to control where the tornadoes were relative to our movement throughout the room. So we formed this half circle. One raid member described it as the open mouth of Pac-Man, with the boss in the middle of the mouth. So by doing this, we force any tornado that will automatically go toward a ranged player to be in the back part of the room. So when that tornado hits that position, the player simply sidesteps a little bit to avoid its circular path. And after a while, once there are too many tornadoes there, the tanks simply pull the boss toward the center of the room, 15 yards or so, and then the entire half circle of ranged players move with it the same distance. Again, keeping that open mouth shape with the boss and the open side of it. So by doing this, you never have a tornado that is in the opposite side of the boss, the direction that the raid is moving, and therefore you're never at risk of accidentally closing yourself off in any way with tornadoes. So it worked really well for us, and I suggest you give it a shot if you have trouble with positioning. Other than that, you're just using the entire length of the room, basically, to give yourself room. So the next major ability is the Unseen Strike, which he just used a moment ago, and this is fairly infrequent, around 40 or 45 seconds. He'll cast on a random raid member, and they'll get a hunter's mark arrow on them, and after 5 seconds, he will have vanished, and then he'll strike at that player, doing a sort of cone attack for massive physical damage. This damage is split with any number of raid members that are stacked on that player in the cone. Like so many abilities these days. So because of that, you simply have to have your entire raid stack on that player, and then you'll all get hit and split the damage and survive. So here's the Unseen Strike. So you can see we all stack up, and then he hits, and we fly, take big damage, and then go back to our stuff. So one thing that's important is that there's a knockback effect in the cone attack, and this can be problematic if you get knocked into tornadoes. So again, this is why we using the half circle positioning and moving forward and all that stuff. But but you can sort of control, to some degree, the direction that he knocks you when you stack up. Basically, it's determined by the facing of the boss, as best we can tell, and you change his facing by where the positioning is of the marked player. So if the player basically stands on the back side of him, so back behind the boss where I am now, which we'll do here for this next strike, there it is. So the boss is on our right, and you can see he knocks us all backwards because his facing basically pushes us that direction. But if we were to stack on the opposite side of him, so move through the boss after the mark goes out a little bit, the boss would have to walk to that player and be on the other side of us. And then when he smacks us, he sort of moves us in the direction we want to go. So you can kind of control it a little bit. It's not solely up to the boss's facing. It's also a matter of where you are relative to him. So not just the boss and the marked player, but everyone in the raid. So as the next strike hits in a few seconds here, you'll see that most of the raid is being pushed off to the left, but I'm slightly too far behind the boss, and so even though the cone should push me in one direction, I go backwards. So here it is. So you can see our druid's sort of off to the left. Most people go up to the left, but a few of us go backwards because we were stepped slightly behind that sort of center of the cone. So again, you can kind of move a little bit after you see the boss slightly appear before the slash hits to just change your positioning a little bit more right at the end there. But that's the basics of how it works. So before we get into the last phase, let's loop back through one more time because there's a few other abilities to talk about here. So the next ability I want to talk about is Wind Step. And this one happens every 25 to 30 seconds, again on a random raid member. He'll target that player, he prefers ranged, as usual, and sort of slash toward them quickly, stealthing as he rushes. When he reaches that player's location, he will debuff them and anyone within 8 yards of that player with the Wind Step buff, which is 30-second dot, and it does pretty heavy physical damage every 3 seconds. So if it wasn't apparent already, you need to sort of stay spread out a little bit with your ranged targets so that only one person gets hit when he uses this. The problem with this ability is that the physical damage from it plus Unseen Strike, which again we're seeing here, can be pretty dangerous in combination. So your healers need to really make sure that people with the what is it called? Wind Step. The Wind Step debuff are topped off as much as possible when that big hit from Unseen Strike is coming up. And also once the hit happens, make sure you throw an instant out as you're flying through the air if possible on those targets. This also is important to heal up your tanks as well after the Unseen Strike. And this is because while tank damage is not crazy high, there's really one ability in this fight that you have to monitor for tanks that's really important. So the reason you need 2 tanks is because of Overwhelming Assault. This is used about every 20 seconds, although it can be delayed if he's using other abilities. This is kind of true for most of his abilities. They all have a pretty basic cooldown. They'll never be used more frequently than that, but then they can be delayed slightly depending on the timing of his other abilities that he's using. So generally speaking, every 20 seconds he'll use Overwhelming Assault on the current tank. And this is basically just a big melee hit, but then when it hits, it also increases the damage from future assault hits by 50%, and it stacks. So you want to trade off after 2 stacks of Overwhelming Assault to the next tank and back and forth, and it lasts 45 seconds. These hits get really big. You can see 400 plus K hits from this when you get the second one. So try to make sure you are aware of the cooldown. So that was one thing that helped myself and our other healer a lot, was just closely monitoring that when that possible cooldown was coming, and just to make sure the current tank is fully topped off at that time. So yeah, that's pretty much the main thing with the tanks. Just note that after the Unseen Strike hits, the following Overwhelming Assault can be pretty deadly. if that tank is not quickly topped off. So you may want to have one healer that's assigned to top off the tank, and one that's assigned to top off people with the wind step debuff or dot. Okay, so now we're approaching the next phase here, which happens at 20%. So as we start the last phase here, you'll notice that we're transported into the center of the room and then moved to the far end via these tornadoes. You can't do anything while you're in these here. And so basically you have to run this gauntlet of tornadoes, very similar to the last boss of the Gate of the Setting Sun 5-man. And once you get to the end, you attack the boss, get him down to 10%, and then he'll go to the opposite end, and you have to run the gauntlet a second time, and then you can finish him off. So the problem is that throughout this whole thing, there's a constant tick of nature damage on everyone in the raid, and it increases very rapidly. So throughout the first half, or first 80% of the fight, before this phase, every 60 seconds the boss would get a stack of Intensify, which increases his damage and haste by 5% per stack. However, once this phase begins, there's a soft and rage mechanic with Intensify. He will stack it every 10 seconds instead. So you can see his buff count to the right of his target frame is at 12 now, and he'll shoot up to 13 in a moment here. And of course, this means that the AE damage keeps going up and up. So obviously, the faster you can get through this phase, the better. That said, because you're only doing 10% damage at once, it's debatable whether Bloodlust is useful on this phase since you're spending so much time running and not very much time DPSing. We used it on earlier in the fight for that reason. But that said, the healing requirement was very tricky on this phase. We found it to be the most challenging part. Essentially, HOTS are king, as you can imagine. Since everyone's moving around a lot, you don't have a lot of time to stand there and heal. So, as a Mistweaver, for example, I just tried to keep my Renewing Mist going on everybody as much as possible. Chi Brew is really good for this, so you can get the 4 Chi on demand, so that you can use 3 or even 4 uplifts in a row for people that might not even be in range of you. That's really good. Revival, obviously, a Mistweaver cooldown is very good. So basically anything you have that is a raid cooldown, mitigation, personal cooldown, anything like that should be used on this phase. Because it just, like I said, the damage is pretty high. So once you reach one end of it, you obviously don't have to dodge tornadoes again until you have to move to the opposite side once more. But that said, you'll notice that there are red circles on the ground under the tornadoes to indicate their radius. So when you get right to the end and they're spawning there, you have to be very careful here. You'll see that you can kind of see where they're spawning with a little graphic and the red circle. So you want to be sure that you're moving in a safe position. Yeah. Other than that, this phase is really just about getting everyone to the platform as quickly as possible. Now, one thing you can probably do, which we did not, because we spent most of the evening doing disconnects trying this with 9 people, and only later got our 10th person online. But you can probably start the phase once you get ported to one end by waiting there a moment and having everyone healed up to full before you move out. Of course, the downside is that his Intensify stacks will go up more since you're spending longer in this phase. But definitely the first transition after this phase begins to the far end of the platform is more difficult because you really don't start with high health at that point. You're going to be low on health as you begin running over. So generally speaking, I found that cooldowns were more important the first run across than the second one coming back. Yeah, but anyway, it's an interesting fight, certainly a cool mechanic at the end. So that's Blade Lord Tayok. Good luck, and thanks for watching.